Every time I get on an airplane and somebody asks me what I do, think about that for a second, and I'm like, I increase the value of your real estate. And it's not because I'm embarrassed to tell them I'm a landscape architect. It's just that I don't want to hear about their tulips. A lot of landscape architects go into this profession because of their love for trees and shrubs. But I was really fascinated by the impact of public space and how design can affect how people move and interact with each other. I'm a son of Chinese immigrants. My parents came to this country to get an education, hoping to go back to China and help rebuild their country after World War II. My father was lucky enough to get a fellowship to study with Frank Lloyd Wright, but he couldn't get his visa out of China in 1947. So the following year, he gets his visa. He's on his way up to Taliesin, and he comes to Chicago, and he ends up meeting this German architect, the OG of modern architecture, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. And he never left Chicago. So he works with Mies for the next 10 years before he starts his own practice. My grandfather on my mother's side, he was a financier of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun Yat-sen has been known, sometimes called the father of modern China, because he got rid of the dynasties. My grandmother was his third wife, and she unfortunately passed away tragically before my mom was 6 years old. So my mom was orphaned, and she kind of bounced around Hong Kong, growing up in Hong Kong with a number of different families, mainly my grandfather's first and second wife's family. But she eventually made her way to do her medical residency at Duke University. I'm always reminded of this photo just to remind myself of the struggles that she had to make it to this country and to survive here. She met my dad in Durham, North Carolina. They got married. My mom used to tease us. She said, I married your father because he had a car. I'm not sure that was a joke. But they made it to Chicago. They, left Durham. They come to Chicago. They have 4 kids, right? And all 4 of us are like a complete disappointment to my parents. All of us. There's no lawyer. There's no doctor. There's no accountant, no engineer. Oh my God. My parents, they would go to parties and like, our children aren't really Chinese. I was growing up and I started to work for my father and work in his office, mainly because they didn't want to put me in daycare. But I would sit there and I would draw, and I learned how to be meticulous. And I think deep inside, my father wanted me to be an architect. And I kind of disappointed him when I said to him, Dad, I kind of like nature. I'm going to start designing with dirt. And he's like, what? But let me tell you why. Because landscape architecture is changing the world. And I want to tell you how that happens. This is landscape architecture back in the old days when we were designing estates for royalty. This is landscape architecture now when we're designing parks for communities. But there's been a lot of change that's been going on in the world. Our world has evolved, and we have some different challenges now that we've got to encounter. 568 million acres of land has been destroyed by wildfires in the last 10 years, just in the United States. The landscape architects at SWA are helping to mitigate that destruction by these designs. And they're also encouraging reforestation methods. Globally, we're flooding 3 times as much as we were 25 years ago. In China, there is a famous landscape architect, Kong Zheng-yu, who started this company called Turnscape, who was designing what he calls sponge cities that kind of soaks in the rainwater during the rainy seasons, but then during the drought, it recharges the water supply. And that's pretty ingenious, right? Meanwhile, here in the US, Kate Orff and her team at Scape have set up these living barriers to armor the coasts of New York City and the Gulf Coast down around New Orleans. If you live in Southern California where they have the wildfires, or you live in Florida where there's a lot of flooding, you cannot buy property insurance. Do you realize that? And the reason why is because they won't insure your property if you get flooded out. They're constantly losing this money. That means your property is worthless. But one of the things that we're also doing is we're learning how landscape architecture, designing with dirt, can help urban living. And so I want to show you a couple of things that might surprise you about how that affects real people. The business owner, the community member, the CTA runner. In 2020, after the George Floyd murders and the civil unrest that ensued afterwards, a lot was going on, if you all remember that, right? And I woke up one night and I was like, what are they doing with all that plywood that they're boarding up the Mag Mile on? You know, the Rolex stores, the Tiffany store. What are they doing with all that plywood? And it turns out they take that plywood and they put it in a dumpster and away it goes to the landfill. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know, there's some pretty good plywood. Why are they doing this? And so, you know, I start calling people and I'm like, let's get all that plywood, let's get it on a truck. And we took it down to the south side into the Chatham neighborhood. And we started to talk to people down there. We were like, hey, you know, we got all this plywood. Can we do something? Because, you know, quite frankly, those neighborhoods also, they have all this, you know, devastated by the looting, devastated by the pandemic. These businesses were losing serious revenue. Let's try this experiment. We're going to do this boardwalk in the parking spaces for 2 blocks on 75th Street. So the next 12 weeks was crazy. And we engaged with 3 different architecture firms. We started calling every foundation, every corporation that we knew. We reached out to the city of Chicago and we started recruiting young men and women from the neighborhood to learn some carpentry skills from Black contractors. That was really important. And they were getting paid. They were getting paid. They were getting paid because there's a value in learning how to do this that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. And so one of the things that happened was, you know, through all of this, folks started saying, wow, what's going on with this? You know, is there anybody from the city? Oh, people are. We kind of did this without a permit, but yeah. But it taught a lesson of reinvesting in your own neighborhood. It taught this lesson that even with the most minimal resources, you can do something to improve your neighborhood and bring some hope and encourage people. And I want to tell you what happened. After this boardwalk got up, the businesses, Brown Sugar Bakery, Vegetarian Soul, Lamb's Barbecue, where I was eating every other day, they saw up to 30% of increase in revenue. That's crazy. During the pandemic. It was amazing. And this is one of the things that I talk about with landscape architecture, that we can change the economic development of neighborhoods. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about identity, neighborhood identity. And we have 77 neighborhoods in this city. How does this big hole in the ground kind of affect the identity of a neighborhood? Well, we kind of found out in the heart of Bridgeport. This is a 300-foot deep hole in the ground, 27 acres. So let me tell you, 29th and Halsted, just to be exact, and 27 acres, just for context, is the same size as Millennium Park. That's a big site. The city took it over in 1972, and they started every big project that was happening in Chicago. They started filling up this hole, and they kept on filling it up with debris, construction debris, and so they kept on filling it, and they kept on filling. 30 years it took for them to fill this hole, and then we come along and we add another 3 feet of dirt on top of that because that becomes an environmental barrier. And we design and we build a park. And that's what today is Palmisano Park, named after a guy who owned a bait shop in Bridgeport. So when we first went to the community with this idea in 2006, they were like, native landscape, wetlands. I thought this was supposed to be a park. We already have a park next door. We have baseball. We have basketball courts and tennis courts. We have a field house. All kinds of activities. You know what? Go ahead, do whatever you want. But could you do us a favor and could you take down the chain link fence with the razor wire on top? Because our kids are, they're going to get hurt and we can't see into there. Today, if you go to Palmasano Park, there's 1.7 miles, 1.7 miles of trails. They see people going down to the fishing hole and they're catching some big sized fish there. You see people training for their MMA fights because, that's what they do in Bridgeport. You have folks climbing on these rock walls. This is an industrial neighborhood that defines Chicago. You wouldn't even imagine this place exists. And on top of that, it changes the narrative of what sustainable landscapes are. 27 acres, not one drop of rainwater goes into the city's combined sewer system. One drop. And it's amazing what people think when they go there, because there's topography. Chicago's really flat. There's a lot of topography. People are just running all over it. They celebrate who they are. And this is how landscape architects are helping communities find their identity. If you got on the red line and you were going up to Evanston, red purple line, you were going up to Evanston, and you stopped at the Lawrence stop and you came down the platform and you found yourself in a brand new neighborhood, it'd be like, where am I? What's going on? That's a project that we're working on right now that we are so excited about. It's amazing. The Chicago Transit Authority started their Red Purple Line modernization project in 2019 to replace over 10 miles of railroad tracks and stations on the north side of Chicago. And during this adventure, the last mile, they decided, hey, let's tear down this retaining wall that's been separating this neighborhood. But what does this do? This opens up this amazing stretch of land, a mile long. And now this opportunity for open space is amazing. So if you go from a small little alley to this big swath of land, our minds start going. We're like, oh man, the things that we can do, this is crazy. But more importantly, we had 2 meetings. Over 450 people showed up. That means they cared. I want to tell you, community engagement is kind of new to this profession. We used to think about, well, we're going to draw something, and our clients will make us draw something that we think that this community is going to like. And we're turning that around. We're actually asking communities what they want before we put pen to paper. And it's pretty incredible to see the things that people want to see and they'd like to see and they'd aspire to be in these spaces. And this is what's exciting us. But the other thing that's exciting us are some of the crazy things that people are also coming up with out of this community, like, hey, it's dark down there. Can we grow mushrooms like a mushroom farm? Or, please, make it all live. Make it like sunshine 24/7. This community, it's very diverse. There are ideas coming from all over the place. Well, we are super excited about this opportunity, and we'll see where this goes. We are bridging the gaps, and we are creating these new neighborhoods. When we design urban spaces, we kind of don't know what's going to happen. What are the long-term effects of this? We know that we start to create a sense of community. We know that there's placemaking involved with this, but we don't know the long-term effects. We don't know this 5-6-year-old kid climbing the rope ladder, what he's going to be thinking 20 years from now. We do know that water calms people down. We also know that things like benches are places of respite and that people can catch up with each other. Old friends can catch up with each other. We did Pingtown Park in 1999, 2000. And I walked my father through this park 2 weeks before it opened. And he was walking through this park, doing his old Chinese band thing, looking down at Jamis. And he never said a word, but his silence was deafening. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking, why didn't my son become a landscape architect? Yeah, and then he was furious that Robert and I were designing this Chinese pavilion in Chinese Park, and we knew nothing about the culture. And he was right. I mean, we're ABCs. We're born in America. My dad passed away a year later from pancreatic cancer, but I never really got that resolved. In 2014, I got my fellowship with the American Society of Landscape Architects, and thank you. I didn't tell my mom for 2-3 months. And when I finally did, she was like, there was this silence. And then she says, well, what took you so long? Your father got his fellowship before he was 50. Why are you so slow? And I'm like, Mom, I'm doing a TED Talk now. Can you give me some props? Please. I never got up to the Edith Farnsworth house when my dad was alive. A year after he passed, I went up there with my kids, and I was amazed by this building and this site. I now know why it's a mecca, architectural mecca of every architectural student and fan there is across the world. The place is beautiful. But what also struck me was the gentleness of the land and the color of the leaves. This is just an amazing place. My father never understood how landscape architecture could change lives and change communities. My mother, my siblings, they wouldn't understand how landscape architecture, designing with dirt, can help climate change or increase neighborhood development or find identity to neighborhoods. But I'll tell you what, my kids, when they were growing up in the city of Chicago, they couldn't get enough of bringing their friends out to these places that are so dope and have music playing and people doing all kinds of things. They were working out and they would just laugh and they would laugh and they would laugh. And I will tell you, landscape architecture is changing the world, but you can change the world too. If we start to address our challenges with science and curiosity, if we start to look at color and function, and always with an eye towards aesthetics, things can change. And together, we can increase the value of our world. Thank you.